Greetings, travelers. Well, here we are at the last part of my Thomas list, where we take a look at the most nostalgic and what I consider to be the best of the series, Season 2. While I love Season 3 and consider it to be the season with the best design and has most of my favorite episodes, I think that Season 2 had the better writing, in my opinion at least. And as a kid, these were the episodes I watched the most. And while I still remember Season 5 a bit more, as that was the season that I saw the most, Season 2 was just a bit more nostalgic since we owned more of those episodes than later seasons. But without further ado, let's go through my top 10 favorite Thomas the Tank Engine episodes. Number 10. Thomas and the Missing Christmas Tree. Starting off the list, we get this season's final episode, which is another really great Christmas episode that has some fun moments in it. Everyone is getting ready for Christmas, and Thomas is tasked with collecting the Christmas tree for the big station. However, on his way back, Thomas ends up getting snowed in, and it's up to Donald and Douglas to come and save him. For the second Christmas episode of the show, I found it has the best design sets out of all the Christmas episodes. From the station to the snowy valley and the mill on Thomas's branch line, this episode really showed how much the show improved from the first season. Plus, I liked how the colors in this episode really popped out and shine against the dark sets at night when everyone is at the station, and in cute Santa hats no less. This is the episode I think of when it comes to Christmas, as it reminds me of all the things centered on the holiday when I was a kid, and is the episode I look forward to watching every year during the holidays. Number 9. Old Iron. Another James episode that, in my opinion, has some of the best chase scenes and the most tense moment from this show. James is being a grouch when Edward arrives late, delivering his passengers, calling him a bunch of old iron to Thomas and Percy. However, when his driver falls ill, some kids play around with his controls, leading him to becoming a runaway train. So it's up to Edward, his driver, James's fireman, and a railway inspector to stop him from causing any damage and get him back under control, where Sir Topham Hatt meets them at the nearest station and congratulates Edward on a job well done and sends him off to be repaired. Like I said before, this episode has one of the best chase scenes in the show with some well done camera work, especially the scene where the railway inspector tries to rope James's buffer so that his fireman can run across and slow James down. Which is some really great music to go along with the tense moments, as the song that was used in this episode was much better utilized than when they introduced it in Percy Runs Away. I think of this episode as the one that showed me as a kid how something as simple as camera work can make a show go from looking like a giant play set and turn it into a high-tension scene of two trains racing along a track. Which is something I wouldn't experience again until movies like Runaway Train and Unstoppable. Number 8. Percy and the Signal. Another great Percy episode that teaches kids to not be such little trolls. Percy is going around and playing a lot of tricks on the bigger engines, specifically on Gordon and James. However, after he ends up getting himself and James into trouble, both Gordon and James decide that enough is enough, and they set up a plan to play a trick on Percy by telling him about a new signal called a backing signal, which leads to him getting tricked, where Gordon and James end up teasing him the night he returns to the sheds. While I do think this season gave a lot of the other engines more time to shine, the one that I think got the most attention this season was Percy, with this episode showing his more trollish and comedic side, while also teaching kids a good lesson about not playing too many tricks on others, or else it will come back to bite you in the ass. Honestly, this is probably one of the more fun comedic episodes, with the engines getting back at one of the biggest trolls of the series. Number 7. Duck Takes Charge. The episode that introduced Duck showed us that he wasn't a pushover despite him being a tank engine. Sir Topham Hatt decides to buy an engine from the Great Western Railway called Montague, who prefers to be called Duck, to help Percy out with all of his extra work. However, the big engines tease and eventually try to order Duck around, much to the annoyance of Percy. But they both come up with a plan to teach them a lesson in who's in charge and that they won't be pushed around for being small engines. I can relate a lot to this episode, as I went through what both Percy and Duck went through when dealing with the big engines. At several of my jobs, I had to deal with people who thought they could boss me around and do their work because I was the new guy and they thought they could take advantage of me and do the work they didn't want to. But things ended up working out for me, and those people were put in their place and left me alone to do my own work. Along with the great message, this episode also introduced fans to another great character in Duck, where we would also get to see more great episodes of him in this and other seasons. Number 6. The Diesel. The episode that introduced fans to not one, not two, but 3 engines that I personally love, even if most fans hate at least 2 of them. In this episode, we are introduced to Bill and Ben, 2 tank engines that work in the clay mines and are prone to pulling pranks on the workers and other engines. One day, the twins have their car stolen by a diesel after they discover some loose oil on the tracks and go to look for the culprit. They soon find their cars and the diesel who took them, named Boko, where they both decide to play a trick on the poor Boko, until Edward comes by and puts an end to their tomfoolery. Another great introduction to characters that I personally love, as I relate to Bill and Ben a lot since I was the youngest and smallest member in my family, and my siblings always got their way. Which is why seeing these 2 get back at someone who I saw was older than them was nice. However, I do sympathize with Boko, as he didn't know better, but was cool and understanding with the situation, and went on to act like a big brother for the twins and some of the other engines. It's a shame that we never got to see him after Season 5, as he was one of the better characters from the show that had a lot of great moments in the episodes he appeared in. Number 5. Donald and Douglas and the Deputation. These episodes introduced me to my favorite bigger steam engines and the better twins of the show compared to that of Bill and Ben, at least according to the fans. Sir Topham Hatt decides to buy an engine from Scotland for his railway, but winds up getting 2 engines instead, the aptly named Donald and Douglas. He initially decides to return one of the engines, but isn't sure which one to send back, so he ends up giving them different trials to see which one to keep, but this ends up backfiring as both of them keep messing up. However, in the second episode, they make up for their mistakes, and with the help of the other engines, the twins end up staying on the island of Sodor. I like these episodes a lot as, just like the other episodes from the first 2 seasons, these character introduction episodes were filled with a lot of great moments, and these episodes showed that Donald and Douglas were hardworking and wanted to prove themselves to Sir Topham Hatt, and that they are worth keeping on his railway. Plus, they also were the best characters that George Carlin voiced, as he did a decent Scottish accent. On the technical side of these episodes, I love the first episode for having some great moments at Edward Station and the destruction of James's train on Gordon's Hill. For the second episode, I love the winter sets as always, but I do like the moment where the engines try to help the twins stay on the island by talking to Sir Topham Hatt, as it shows that the engines do care about them and want them to stay and help on their railroad. Number 4. Percy's Predicament. One of the best Crash episodes from Season 2, that was the end of a series of episodes involving one of the more uncannier designed engines. Percy and Toby are trying to take care of Thomas's branch line after he got into an accident several episodes ago, but find it difficult as the engine that Sir Topham Hatt got to help them, named Daisy, is lazy and does whatever she wants without any consequences. However, when Percy tries to bring some of Toby's cars from the quarry, he ends up getting into an accident and must be sent to the works after Thomas comes back. This is another episode that I love for the crash, as it's one of the more exciting crashes compared to the other ones from Season 2, for having the same adrenaline rush as Old Iron and the destruction from any of the later episodes. I also like this episode for the introduction and design of the quarry, as I liked the design for how rustic and old it was, which was sadly scrapped after this season. As far as it goes to the new character that was introduced in this arc, this episode being the third and final episode she was a part of, Daisy was honestly a character that always creeped me out, as she looked uncanny with her long eyelashes and having makeup on her face. It just didn't sit right with me, and it even led to me having one of the worst nightmares that I still remember having as a kid. Number 3. Pop Goes the Diesel, Diesel's Devious Steed, and A Close Shave for Duck. These episodes are probably the most well-known from this season, as it introduced fans to the first reoccurring villain of the show, Devious Diesel. These episodes follow Duck, as in the first episode, he's asked by Sir Topham Hatt to show the newest engine he acquired, named Diesel, around the yards of Tidmouth, which leads to Duck playing a trick on Diesel so he can learn humility after Diesel says that diesels are better than steam engines and that they will eventually be scrapped, which leads to him getting humiliated after he tries to pull some old and unused cars from an unused siding, and the episode ending with the freight cars singing a mocking song. In the second episode, the freight cars are still singing their song that mocks Diesel, who blames Duck for their mockery, which does make sense as he was tricked by Duck, but it's never addressed in the show. So he plans his own trick that will get Duck blamed for telling the cars about what he thinks about the other engines. which leads to the other engines finding out about this, and Sir Topham Hatt having to ask Duck to work on Edward's branch line while he figures things out. The finale of this arc sees Duck working with Edward on his branch line and ends up stopping a major accident after Edward's cars break away and he slows them down so that the signalman can change the points so that Duck runs into a siding and crashes into a barber shop. These episodes are some of the best from Season 2 as they gave us some funny and heartfelt moments with Duck and the introduction of Diesel, who uses his sly cunning to get back at Duck for being teased. And of course, the final episode is in my top 5 favorite Crash episodes with how exhilarating and exciting the lead up to the crash is. Plus, I like that the ending has Duck return to Tidmouth Sheds as Sir Topham Hatt never believed Diesel's lies and sent him packing. Until Season 3, that is. Overall, these are some great Duck-centered Thomas episodes, and were a great introduction to one of the villains of the series that I love returning to as a kid. Number 2. Safe from Scrap and a New Friend for Thomas. These episodes introduced my personal favorite non-engine character and showed more great sets that would be expanded upon in later seasons. Edward is going to deliver some scrap to the scrap yards. When he gets there, he meets an old but still useful traction engine, or tractor for those of us not from the UK, named Trevor and decides to help him from being broken down. It's here that he runs into his friend, the local vicar, who Edward tells him about Trevor and asks to save him. He ends up buying Trevor, restores him, and has him work in his orchard. The other episode involves Trevor feeling a little bored with his work, but ends up helping Thomas clear away some debris from the docks, and even gets to give some children that Thomas brings for a little ride. These episodes are ones that might not be as entertaining as ones like the Duck trilogy, but I still like them for introducing us to Trevor, as he was always my favorite non-engine character that was always willing to help whenever he could. Again, I want to point out how much I love the sets in this season. I find that the sets of this season are really good because of how rustic and worn down they look. It shows that the island is a lot older and that there may have been others on the railway, but they are no longer here for whatever reason. It's nice to see some more lore added to this show that I noticed more when I go back to these episodes. Although I will admit that the sets are improved the most in Season 5, but the ones from this season is where my love for the set designs from the show that used models started. Number 1. Percy's Ghostly Trick. Well, travelers, I've been teasing this episode for long enough. Not only is this my favorite episode of all of Thomas the Tank Engine, but I also have an interesting history with it. Percy tells Thomas and Toby a ghost story about a train that haunts their line. Thomas, of course, doesn't believe the story and says Percy is just being silly for believing in something made up. However, the next night as Percy is heading home, he runs into a cart of lime that covers him from funnel to wheels in pure white lime, making him look like a ghost. So, with the help of Toby, he plans to scare Thomas for making fun of him and his story. From just that description, you'd think this episode would be a little silly while having some good horror elements that would scare kids. However, you'd be wrong, because this episode goes hard on the horror stuff, that I could never watch this episode all the way through as a kid, and I would skip the opening and a bit of the ending because of how scared I was of it. However, because of that opening, I got into horror at a young age, and it helped me appreciate how an episode was able to build upon atmosphere and mood when I started watching horror movies. If you don't believe me, I'm going to leave a link below to the episode and the song they use at the opening for those of you looking for some horror goodness. I know for many kids this was the episode that scared them, and for me, while I was scared of this episode as well, I've since then grown to appreciate it for opening the floodgates and introducing me to the horror genre. Well, that's it for my second top 50. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and tune in next time for my 100th episode where we go back to the Bodega Bay Inn for more puppety goodness. As always, I'm Dr. Waluigi, and remember, don't judge a book by its cover, cause you'll never know what's inside. Good night, everyone.